He was supposed to choose the pretty one, the polished one, the one they'd spent thousands of dollars dressing up for exactly this moment. Instead, he pointed at the fat girl standing in the gravel, the one nobody had even bothered to introduce, and said one word, her. And in that single second, everyone in that driveway realized the same terrifying thing at once. This man didn't make mistakes, which meant he knew something about her that they didn't. Before we go back to that driveway, if you're new here, hit subscribe to Mr. Mafia Boss, because this channel is where the dangerous men and the women who outsmart them live. Before you go, drop a comment and tell me where in the world you're listening from tonight. I pick a few of you for a shout-out in the next story, so don't be shy. We're building something here, not just a channel, and I want to know who's in it with me. Now, let's find out exactly why he pointed at her. The driveway smelled like fresh-cut grass and old money. Elena Rossi stood at the edge of it, arms crossed over a cardigan she'd owned since college, watching 3 black cars roll up like a funeral procession nobody had the decency to admit was for her family's dignity. Her father had been rehearsing this moment for a week. "Stand up straight," Richard Hale said, not looking at her. He was looking at Vivian, then at Blair, then at Camille, adjusting an invisible crown on each of their heads with his eyes alone. "Smile like you mean it." Elena almost laughed. Almost. She'd learned a long time ago that laughing at the wrong moment in this house cost more than it was worth. Her sisters, half-sisters, though nobody in this family used that word out loud, were arranged like a display case. Vivian in white, hair pressed silk straight. Blair in blush pink, lips glossed to catch the light. Camille in tan, arms folded just enough to show off a bracelet their father had bought her for exactly this occasion. And Elena, 3 feet to the side, in the same cardigan, standing where the landscaping ended and the gravel began. Nobody had bought her anything for this occasion. Nobody had told her there was an occasion until this morning, when her father knocked once on her door and said, "Wear something decent, we have a guest," in the tone he used for furniture deliveries. She hadn't asked who the guest was. She'd learned that too. Questions in this house were currency you spent and never got back. The first car door opened. A man stepped out first, broad-shouldered, sunglasses, the kind of stillness that made her stomach tighten without her permission. Security, she guessed. He didn't look at the house. He looked at the street, the trees, the neighbor's mailbox, like he was cataloging every place a threat could come from. Then the second door. Elena didn't mean to hold her breath. It just happened, the way it happens when the air in a room changes before you understand why. He wasn't tall in a way that made him seem large. He was tall, in a way that made the space around him rearrange itself. Dark hair, damp at the edges like he'd showered an hour ago and hadn't thought about it since. A black shirt, sleeves rolled to the forearm, tattoos disappearing under the cuff like they had somewhere else to be. He moved like a man who had never once in his life had to hurry. Richard straightened so fast Elena heard his spine crack. "Mr. DeSantis," her father said, and his voice did the thing it only did around people he was afraid of. Warm, careful, a little too loud. "Thank you for coming personally. This means a great deal." Luca DeSantis didn't answer him. He was looking past Richard entirely, at the 3 women lined up like prizes at a carnival booth, and Elena watched something flicker behind his eyes that she couldn't name yet. Not interest, not exactly boredom either. Something closer to recognition, the look of a man confirming something he already suspected. "These are my daughters," Richard said, gesturing like he was unveiling a car. "Vivian, my eldest. Blair, Camille." Each name, each smile. Vivian tilted her chin. Blair let her lashes do the work. Camille touched her bracelet like it might catch the light better if she moved. Elena stood at the edge of the driveway, watching a debt get settled with women instead of money, and thought, distantly, that at least the weather was nice for it. Nobody said her name. Luca DeSantis's eyes moved down the line once, slow, unreadable. Then, they stopped. Not on Vivian, not on Blair, not on Camille. They stopped on the girl standing where the grass met the gravel, the one nobody had bothered to introduce, and something in his jaw went very, very still. Choose any daughter, Richard said. He said it the way a man says something he's already decided the answer to. Confident, loose-shouldered. A salesman closing a deal he'd been closing his whole life. Any of the three, he added. And Elena noted, with the kind of detachment that only comes from years of practice, that he'd specified. Any of the three. As if there were only three to choose from. As if she were a fourth chair nobody had sat at the table. She didn't flinch. She'd stopped flinching at things like this around age 14. Luca DeSantis didn't move. The silence stretched long enough that Vivian's smile started to strain at the corners. Long enough that Blair's chin lift began to look less like confidence and more like a woman holding a pose she hadn't expected to hold this long. Camille's fingers found her bracelet again, turning it. Elena watched him think. That was the strange part. He wasn't looking at the three women being offered to him like place settings. He was looking at the whole picture. The house, the driveway, the careful staging of it. The way Richard's hand rested a little too tightly on Vivian's shoulder, as if to say, this one, take this one. She photographs well. And then his eyes came back to Elena. Really came back. Not a glance. A look that lasted long enough to feel like being weighed on a scale she hadn't agreed to step on. She held it. Some part of her, the part that had learned to survive this house, by never once looking away first, held his gaze and thought, with the dry, private humor that was the only thing this family had never managed to take from her. Well, this is new. Usually I'm invisible faster than this. Mr. DeSantis, Richard said, a little too quickly, sensing something in the pause that he didn't like. Vivian's finishing her business degree. Very sharp. Blair speaks 3 languages. Camille, I wasn't asking for a resume. His voice was quiet. That was what caught her off guard. Not volume, but the total absence of it. A voice that didn't need to be loud, because it had never once needed to repeat itself. Richard's mouth opened and closed. Luca stepped forward. Not toward Vivian, whose smile was still holding, valiant and brittle. Not toward Blair, who had angled herself slightly, catching the light the way she'd clearly practiced. Not toward Camille, whose bracelet had gone still on her wrist, as if even the jewelry sensed something was wrong. He walked past all 3 of them. Elena felt her pulse do something stupid and fast in her throat, the kind of reaction she had no name for, and even less patience for, and she told herself, sternly, that a stranger walking in her general direction was not an event worth this much heartbeat. He stopped in front of her, close enough that she had to tip her head back slightly to hold his eyes, close enough that she caught the smell of him, cedar, and something underneath it, clean and cold, like the inside of a car that had been driven fast with the windows down. He raised his hand and pointed, straight at her. Her, Luca DeSantis said. For one full second, nobody breathed. Not Richard, whose face had gone the color of old paper. Not Vivian, whose smile finally, completely, cracked. Not Blair or Camille, who exchanged a look of pure, uncomprehending horror, as if the world had tilted on an axis nobody had told them existed. Elena didn't breathe either, but for a different reason. She was doing the math. Fast, silent, the way she did math on everything in this house. What this would cost her, what it meant, what kind of man chose the daughter standing on gravel instead of the ones standing on grass, and why. Out of every possible mistake a man like this could make, he had made this one so certainly, so instantly, like he'd walked in already knowing the answer. There's been a mistake, Richard said, laughing, though nothing about his face was laughing. Elena isn't, she's not really part of this. She's not even, I know exactly what she is, Luca said, and he didn't look away from her once. That's the point. Somewhere behind her, she heard Camille's bracelet hit the pavement. The house didn't go quiet after he said it. It went loud in a different way. The kind of loud that lives underneath a smile, in the tight corners of a mouth, in the sound of heels shifting on pavement. Elena isn't. Richard tried again, stepping toward Luca with the particular urgency of a man watching a deal fall apart in real time. You misunderstand. She's not one of the options. She helps around the house. She's not. I heard you the first time, Luca said, And something in his tone made her father's mouth snap shut, like a trap releasing its own spring. Vivian recovered first, because Vivian always recovered first. It was, Elena thought, probably the one genuinely impressive thing about her. Mr. DeSantis, I think there's been some confusion. I'm happy to show you the property. We could talk about the terms of the arrangement. There's no confusion. He hadn't looked away from Elena once. Not for Vivian's voice. Not for the way Blair had drifted half a step closer. Not even for the sound of Camille finally bending down to retrieve her bracelet with hands that weren't quite steady. I made my decision walking up the driveway. Elena felt the words land somewhere she wasn't prepared for, before he'd even gotten out of the car. That didn't make sense. She was standing at the edge of a lineup nobody had told her she was part of, wearing a cardigan with a loose thread at the cuff, and this man, this stranger with a voice like a closed door, was telling her he'd chosen her before he'd said a single word to any of them. "You don't know me," she said. It was the first thing she'd said since the cars pulled up, and her own voice startled her a little. Dry and even, the tone she used when she wanted people to think she felt nothing at all. It was a good trick. She'd built it carefully, over years, the way other people built savings accounts. Luca's mouth did something that wasn't quite a smile. "I know enough?" That's a very confident thing to say about a woman standing in gravel. Something shifted behind his eyes. Quick, there and gone. Like he hadn't expected that. Like the girl he'd pointed at wasn't supposed to talk back. And the fact that she had rearranged something in his estimation of her. Elena. Her father's voice had dropped into the register he used when he wanted to remind her, without witnesses, that she owed him something. "This isn't the time. You're right," she said, not looking at him. "It's a terrible time. I'd have worn better shoes." Blair made a sound that might have been a laugh if she hadn't caught herself. Luca's gaze flicked toward her father, and whatever had been mildly amused in his face when Elena spoke went cold and flat when he looked at Richard. "You told me you'd have 3 daughters ready. You showed me 4, and tried to hide one behind the hedge. She's not really." Richard was floundering now, and Elena watched it happen with the strange, clinical fascination of someone watching a building she'd never liked start to lean. "She's not blood. She's a ward. A family friend's daughter. We took her in. It's not the same thing. She's not part of the arrangement. I didn't ask if she was blood." The words hit the driveway like something dropped from a height. Elena's stomach turned over, slow and cold, because there was a particular weight to the way he said it. Not a slip, not a guess, but the sound of a man stating a fact he already had in his pocket. She'd spent 20 years in this house, being reminded, quietly and constantly, in 100 small architectural ways, that she wasn't really a Hale. Different bedroom on a different hallway. Different tone at the dinner table. A birthday remembered a week late, if at all. But nobody outside this house was supposed to know that. "How," she said slowly, "would you know that?" Luca looked at her, and for the first time since he'd stepped out of the car, something almost gentle moved through his expression. Gone as fast as it came, replaced by the same unreadable calm. But she'd seen it. She knew she'd seen it. "Because I make it my business to know things," he said. "Especially things people work very hard to hide." "That's not an answer." "No," he agreed. "It isn't." Richard let out a short, humorless laugh, the kind men used when they were trying to convince a room the ground under them wasn't cracking. "Mr. DeSantis, with respect, I don't know what game this is, but Elena has nothing to offer you. No education past community college, no polish. She's not built for your world. Take Vivian. Take any of them. I'm asking you as a reasonable man." Luca's eyes stayed on Elena. "I am being reasonable. She'll embarrass you. She hasn't yet." Elena felt that land somewhere unfamiliar, somewhere she didn't have a defense built for, and she hated it a little, the way her chest went tight and warm at a sentence that shouldn't have meant anything from a man she'd known for 4 minutes. "I don't know what you think you know about me," she said, steadying her voice by sheer will. "But you don't. I know you're the one who kept this house running for 6 years while your father took credit for it," Luca said, quiet, even, like he was reading off a list he'd already memorized. I know you haven't had a birthday mentioned at that dinner table since you were 19. I know you stood 3 feet off the grass today because nobody told you where you were supposed to stand, and you still didn't run. The driveway had gone entirely silent. So don't tell me I don't know you, he said. Tell me I'm wrong. Elena opened her mouth. She didn't have anything to say. She didn't have anything to say, and that terrified her more than anything else that had happened in the last 5 minutes. Luca DeSantis turned from her, finally, mercifully, and looked at her father with an expression that had gone entirely businesslike, as if the last 30 seconds hadn't happened, as if he hadn't just laid her whole life out on the driveway like a hand of cards. We leave within the hour, he said. Leave, Richard repeated, like the word had teeth. Leave for where? That's not something I discussed twice. You can't just… Her father's voice cracked at the edges, control slipping through his fingers like water. You can't take her without an explanation. She's not prepared. There are things you don't understand about her, about the arrangement, about what she is and isn't capable of. I understand plenty. Then explain it to me, Richard snapped. And for a moment, Elena almost felt something for him. Almost. The way you feel something watching a man lose a game he'd rigged himself to win. Explain why her. My daughters are educated, refined. Elena is… Careful, Luca said, and it wasn't loud, but the security man near the car shifted his weight, subtle, like a dog catching a change in the air. Richard stopped. Elena watched her father recalibrate in real time, the way he always did when a room stopped bending to him. Smaller, quicker, uglier around the eyes. I only mean, he said, softer now, that I'd like to understand your reasoning. As a father, you gave that up, Luca said, the moment you lined her up like an afterthought and hoped I wouldn't notice. Elena felt something twist in her chest, sharp and unfamiliar, because nobody had ever said something like that in this house, out loud, in daylight, in front of witnesses. She'd absorbed the truth of it for years in private, in the quiet moments, in the unspoken hierarchy of bedrooms and birthdays and who got introduced first. But hearing it said, flatly, by a stranger who apparently already knew, cracked something open she wasn't ready for. I'd like an explanation too, she said, and her voice came out steadier than she expected, because sarcasm was easier to hold on to than whatever the other feeling was. Since I'm apparently the item being discussed, do I get a say, or is this a package deal with my father's debt? Luca turned back to her, and something about his focus, total and immediate, made her wish she hadn't spoken quite so fast. You get a say, he said, but not here. That's convenient. It's practical. His eyes moved briefly to Richard, to the house behind him, to the 2 security men still stationed by the cars like statues. Whatever I tell you without an audience that benefits from twisting it. So you don't explain, she said slowly. You just expect me to get in a car with a man I met 4 minutes ago, because he says please trust me, not here. I didn't say please. No, she agreed. You didn't. Something almost like amusement crossed his face again, brief and gone, like sunlight passing under a door. You're allowed to say no, Elena. Her name in his mouth did something strange to her stomach that she chose, deliberately, not to examine. Am I? She said, because it didn't sound like a question when you pointed at me, like I was a used car you'd already decided to buy. It wasn't a question, he admitted, but it is now. Richard made a strangled sound behind them, some mixture of outrage and desperation, and started toward Elena with his hand half raised. A gesture she knew too well, the one that used to mean get in the house, don't embarrass me, we'll discuss this later, in a voice that was never a discussion at all. And Luca stepped, without any visible effort, exactly into the space between them. He didn't touch Richard. He didn't have to. You don't get to finish that motion, Luca said quietly. Her father froze, hand still half lifted, face going through several colors, before settling on something pale and furious. Elena stared at the space Luca had just occupied, at the easy, absolute authority of a man who'd stepped between her and 20 years of small, practiced cruelty without even raising his voice, and felt the ground under her understanding of the world shift half an inch to the left. I need 5 minutes, she said finally, to no one and everyone. To decide if I'm getting in a car with a stranger who apparently knows more about my childhood than I told anyone. Take 10, Luca said. How generous. I can be, he said, when it matters. She walked toward the house on legs that didn't quite feel like her own, aware of every eye on the driveway following her. Her sisters, wide and stunned. Her father's, furious and calculating. And his, steady, patient, entirely unbothered by the 10 minutes he'd just handed her, like he had all the time in the world and nowhere else he needed to be. At the door, she paused and looked back once. For what it's worth, she said, you still haven't told me why. I know, Luca said. That's for the car. The car smelled like leather and cedar, and Elena sat as far into her corner of the seat as the door would allow, hands folded in her lap, like she was bracing for turbulence that hadn't started yet. Luca sat across from her, not beside her. She noticed that, filed it away, wasn't sure yet what to do with the information that he'd chosen distance, when he could have chosen otherwise. The city slid past the windows, glass and gray and unfamiliar. You said the car, she said, when the silence had stretched long enough to feel like a dare. We're in the car. I did say that. So, he studied her for a moment, the same unhurried weighing look he'd given her in the driveway. Except now, there was nowhere for her to stand 3 feet off the grass and pretend she wasn't part of the conversation. Your mother's name was Teresa, he said. Elena's spine went rigid. She worked for a man named Salvatore Conti, he continued, evenly, like he was reading weather. Not directly, peripherally. Bookkeeping, mostly, for a business that used bookkeeping as a polite word for something else. She was good at her job. Good enough that when things went wrong, and things went wrong, the way they always do in that world, she knew exactly which numbers to erase and which ones to keep. I don't know what you're talking about. You do, he said, not unkindly. You just don't know you know it. Elena's hands had gone cold in her lap. She thought of the one photograph she owned of a woman she couldn't remember. Dark hair, tired eyes, a smile that looked practiced even in a snapshot, tucked in a drawer in a bedroom that had never quite felt like hers, in a house where nobody spoke her mother's name because nobody had ever bothered learning it. Richard isn't your father, Luca said. You already knew that, I think. What you don't know is that your mother didn't die in an accident. She was protecting something, someone. And when it came time to disappear, she left you somewhere she thought would be safe. With a man who owed Conti a debt he could only repay by taking you in and staying quiet. That's not. Elena's voice cracked, just slightly. Just enough that she hated herself for it. That's not what happened. My mother died in a car accident when I was 3. Richard told me himself. Richard told you a version, Luca said. The version that kept you compliant and kept him paid. Paid, she repeated. For what? For raising you quietly. For never asking questions. For making sure that if anyone ever came looking for Teresa Rossi's daughter, they'd find a girl who'd been folded so deep into someone else's family that nobody would think to look twice. Elena stared at him, and something in her chest that had been holding very still for a very long time started, without permission, to shake. Why would anyone come looking? She said. For me. Luca's jaw tightened. The first crack she'd seen in his composure since the driveway. Because your mother didn't just erase numbers, Elena. She kept a record, a ledger, insurance, in case Conti ever turned on her, which he eventually did. Names, dates, transactions, that a dozen powerful men would very much prefer stayed buried. And you think I have it. I think you might not even know you have it, he said. But yes, I think it's somewhere in that house, or somewhere your mother meant for you to find. And I think Richard has spent 20 years terrified that one day someone would come asking, and he'd have to admit he never even looked. The car went quiet, except for the low hum of the road. So that's it, Elena said finally, and her voice had gone flat, careful, the tone she used to keep the ground from tilting entirely out from under her. That's why you chose me. Not because you saw something, because you wanted something. Something flickered across his face. Fast, sharp, almost wounded, though she couldn't imagine a man like him being wounded by anything she said. "That's part of it," he admitted. "I won't lie to you about that. I need what your mother left behind. It matters. To me, to people I answer to a war that's been quietly burning for longer than you've been alive. And the rest of it?" Her voice came out smaller than she wanted. "You said her because it was the point. What was the rest of it?" Luca leaned forward, elbows on his knees, and for the first time since she'd met him, he looked less like a man delivering information and more like a man choosing his next words very, very carefully. "The rest of it," he said, "is that I watched you stand in that driveway for 10 minutes while 3 women performed a version of themselves for my benefit, and you didn't perform anything. You didn't smile like you were being sold. You didn't hate them for smiling either. You just watched and waited, and didn't flinch when your own father tried to hide you behind a hedge like an embarrassment. That's not a reason to point at someone." "No," he agreed, "but it's a reason to look twice." Elena turned to the window, throat tight, watching the city blur past in shapes she couldn't name. "You could have just told me," she said quietly. "In the driveway. About the ledger. About my mother. Instead of making it a show. If I'd told you the real reason in front of your father," Luca said, "he'd have had you in a locked room within the hour, tearing that house apart looking for something you don't even know exists, and you'd have been a liability instead of a person. This way, you're simply gone, chosen. A story he can tell himself, instead of a threat he has to manage." Elena absorbed that, turning it over, hating that it made a cold kind of sense. "You planned all of it," she said. "The pointing, the choosing, all of it, before you even got out of the car." "I plan most things," Luca said. "It's a habit that's kept me alive." "And me? Was I planned, or was I collateral in a plan for something else?" He didn't answer right away, and the silence stretched long enough that she thought maybe he wouldn't, that maybe this was simply how it would be. Calculated silences, standing in for whatever honesty was supposed to look like. "I didn't plan you," he said finally, quiet, like the words cost him something. "I planned the ledger. I planned getting you out of that house. I didn't plan standing in that driveway and finding a woman who looked at me like I was a problem to be solved, instead of a prize to be won." Elena didn't have an answer for that either. The estate, when they arrived, was nothing like she'd expected. She'd braced herself for something ostentatious, marble and gold, and the particular ugliness of money that needed to announce itself. But the house that rose at the end of the long gravel drive was quiet in a way that unsettled her more than grandeur would have. Stone and dark wood. Old trees left standing instead of cleared for a better view. A house that didn't need to prove anything to anyone. "You live alone here," she said. Not quite a question. "Mostly," Luca said, stepping out of the car and rounding to her side before she'd even reached for the handle. "Staff. Security. No one who asks questions I don't want to answer." Comforting. It wasn't meant to be comfortable. It was meant to be honest. Inside, a woman met them in the front hall. 60, maybe. Sharp-eyed, dressed plainly. The kind of person who ran a household by knowing exactly where everything was, without ever raising her voice. She looked Elena over once, thoroughly, the way a person appraises weather before deciding whether to bring an umbrella. "This is Rosa," Luca said. "She'll show you to your room." "My room," Elena repeated. "Not a cell." Good to know the terminology. Rosa's mouth twitched, almost a smile, quickly suppressed. "She's got a mouth on her," Rosa said to Luca, not unkindly. "I noticed," he said. Elena followed Rosa up a wide staircase, aware of Luca's eyes on her back the entire way, and told herself firmly that the awareness meant nothing, that a person could feel watched without it meaning anything at all. The room Rosa led her to was simple and warm. A bed, a window overlooking the tree line, a small desk, nothing performative about it, nothing designed to impress. It was, Elena realized with something like surprise, the first room in longer than she could remember that hadn't been arranged to communicate her place in a hierarchy. "There's a bathroom through there," Rosa said. "Clothes in the closet, if you need them. Kitchen's downstairs whenever you're hungry." Nobody in this house will make you ask permission for food. Something in Elena's chest went tight and strange at that sentence. At the casual, matter-of-fact kindness of it, delivered like it wasn't remarkable at all. "Thank you," she managed. Rosa studied her a moment longer, something assessing in her gaze that reminded Elena uncomfortably of Luca's. "He doesn't bring people here," she said. "Just so you understand what you're standing in." "I don't understand any of it," Elena admitted. "For what it's worth." "You will," Rosa said. "Or you won't, and you'll leave. And either way, it'll be your choice." That's more than most people in his world get. She left Elena alone with that. Downstairs, later, she found Luca in a study lined with books that looked red rather than decorative. A fire low in the grate, despite the season. Papers spread across a desk that he swept into a folder the moment she appeared in the doorway. "You don't have to hide things from me," she said. "I already know I'm here for a treasure hunt." "Habit," he said, and didn't apologize for it. She stepped further into the room, arms crossed, studying him the way he'd studied her all day, turning the tables, seeing how he liked it. "You said your people are looking for a ledger my mother hid 20 years ago. You said Richard spent 2 decades too scared to look for it himself. But you didn't say what happens to me once you find it." "Nothing happens to you. That's not an answer. That's a hope." Something shifted in his face. She was starting to learn the register of it, the small ways his control cracked when she pushed somewhere true. "You're not a means to an end, Elena. You stopped being that the moment you stood in the driveway and told me I didn't know you. I could still be both." "You could," he agreed. "But you're not." She studied him, arms still crossed, unwilling to let the moment soften into something she wasn't ready for. "You know things about me I don't know about myself. My mother, whatever this Conti man was to her. That's not a small thing to carry into a room with a stranger." "No," he admitted. "It isn't." "So tell me something true," she said. "Something that isn't strategy. Since apparently I'm not just a means to an end." Luca was quiet for a long moment, the fire cracking softly in the grate. And when he spoke, his voice had lost some of its careful control. "I've spent 6 years building walls around this house. This life, this business, specifically, so nothing could get in that I couldn't predict or manage," he said. "I watched you for 4 minutes in that driveway and predicted nothing about you correctly. Not once. That hasn't happened to me in longer than I can remember." Elena felt the words land somewhere unguarded, somewhere she hadn't finished reinforcing yet. "That's not an answer either," she said, quieter now. "No," Luca said. "But it's true. And it's more than I've given anyone in a very long time." She held his gaze across the firelit room, aware suddenly of how far she'd come in a single day. From gravel to marble floors, from invisible to chosen, from a girl who'd learned to expect nothing, to a woman standing in a stranger's study being told, in the careful, unpracticed language of a man who didn't know how to say it any other way, that she mattered. "I still don't trust you," she said. "Good," Luca said. "You shouldn't. Not yet." She found the photograph 3 days later, in a box Rosa had brought up from storage, without being asked. "Old things," Rosa said, "that Luca thought she might want to see. Things that had come from her mother's side, quietly acquired over the years by people whose job it was to know where things ended up." Elena sat on the floor of her room with the box open in front of her, sorting through the debris of a life she'd never been allowed to remember. A hairbrush, a rosary, a stack of photographs curling at the edges, and beneath them, wrapped in a scarf that still, impossibly, carried a ghost of perfume, a small leather notebook. Her hands went still. She carried it downstairs without deciding to, the way a body sometimes moves faster than the mind attached to it, and found Luca in the study, where he seemed to live half his life, papers spread in front of him, a glass of something amber untouched at his elbow. "I found this," she said, and set the notebook on the desk between them. He looked at it, and something crossed his face she hadn't seen before. Not the careful control, not the calculated stillness, but something closer to want, raw and unguarded, for exactly 1 second before he folded it away again. "May I?" he asked. It struck her, the asking. Everything about the last 3 days had been him deciding things, and her absorbing the decisions, and here he was, hand hovering an inch above a notebook he'd crossed an ocean of strategy to find, asking her permission like it mattered. "It's not the ledger," she said. "I already checked. It's just dates, places, half of it's in Italian. I can't read most of it." "May I?" he said again, and she realized he meant it as a question about her, not the book. Whether she was ready to let this be looked at, examined, turned into evidence in someone else's war. "Yes," she said. He opened it carefully, and for a long moment, the only sound in the room was the soft rasp of pages and the low crack of the fire. Elena watched his face change as he read. Recognition, then something darker, something that tightened the muscle at his jaw. "Your mother wasn't just Conti's bookkeeper," he said finally, quiet. "She was building a case, slowly, methodically, over years. Every transaction she erased for him, she copied first. Dates, amounts, names of the men who paid to make problems disappear. Why would she do that? If it got her killed, because she wanted out," Luca said. "And men like Conti don't let people out. Not people who know what she knew. So she built herself a door instead. Insurance. If anything happened to her, this went somewhere it would matter. She just never got the chance to send it." Elena sat down slowly in the chair across from him, the weight of 20 years of half-truths settling into her chest like stone. "So Richard's known this whole time, that my mother left something dangerous behind, that I might have it and not even know." "I believe so, yes. And instead of protecting me," she said, "he lined me up at the edge of a driveway and hoped a stranger wouldn't look too closely." "Yes." The single word landed harder than a longer explanation would have. She appreciated that about him, she realized. That he didn't cushion things, didn't soften the shape of a truth just to make it easier to hold. "There's a name in here," Luca said, turning the notebook toward her, tapping a line of cramped handwriting. "Written more than the others. Salvatore Conti's second, a man named Frank Delgado. Your mother flagged him specifically. Money moving through accounts that shouldn't have existed, tied to men who are, as it happens, still very much alive and still very much in business." "Still in business with you?" "Against me," Luca said. "Delgado runs half the territory I've spent 6 years trying to take back from men who killed my father to get it. If your mother's notebook connects him to the transactions I think it does, it's not just insurance for you, it's a weapon for me." Elena absorbed that, turning the shape of it over. "So this is bigger than a ledger. This is a war. It always was," Luca said. "You just didn't know you were standing in the middle of it until 3 days ago. And Richard knew," she said slowly, something cold settling into her voice. "He knew you were coming to collect a debt. He knew what you might be looking for. He knew. And instead of warning me, he tried to sell me off with my sisters like none of it mattered. I think," Luca said carefully, "he was hoping you'd simply never be looked at closely enough for any of it to matter. That's not protection. That's a man betting his daughter's safety on being forgettable." "I'm not his daughter," Elena said, and the words tasted strange in her mouth. True for the first time out loud. "I never was." "No," Luca agreed. "You were something he was paid to hide. There's a difference, and I think some part of you has known that difference your entire life." Elena looked down at the notebook, at her mother's handwriting, careful and slanted and entirely unfamiliar. A woman she'd spent 22 years believing had died in an accident, instead of a woman who'd died protecting a secret large enough to still be dangerous. "I want to see him," she said. "Richard, I want to look him in the eye and ask him why." Luca's expression didn't change, but something in his posture did, a stillness that felt, suddenly, less like calm and more like restraint. "That's not safe. Not yet. If Delgado has any idea this notebook surfaced, Richard's house is the first place he'll look, and I won't have you standing in the middle of that. You don't get to decide that for me. I'm not deciding it for you," he said. "I'm telling you what it costs. You can still choose to pay it. I'd just rather you choose with the full price in front of you instead of half of it." Elena held his gaze, feeling something in her chest that had been coiled tight for 3 days start to loosen, just slightly, at the fact that he'd argued with her instead of simply forbidding it. Nobody in her life had ever bothered to argue. They'd simply decided, and she'd simply absorbed it. "Fine," she said. "Tell me the whole price." "If we go," Luca said, "we go with security, and we go on my terms, and if I say we leave, we leave. No negotiation. Because I am not burying you in that ground 3 days after I pulled you out of it." Something about the roughness in his voice on that last sentence caught her off guard, made her look at him a beat too long, made the fire in the grate suddenly feel very loud in the silence between them. "Okay," she said, quieter now. "Your terms." The Hale house looked smaller than she remembered, though only 3 days had passed. Elena supposed that was what happened when you stopped needing a place to be larger than you were. Luca's men flanked the car, unhurried, unhidden, a visible answer to whatever calculations Richard might attempt the moment they arrived. Elena stepped out into the same driveway where she'd stood at the edge of the grass 4 days ago, except this time nobody had to tell her where to stand. Richard opened the door himself, and the sight of Luca beside her drained something from his face immediately. "Elena," her father's voice pitched too high, too fast, the sound of a man recalibrating in real time. "You came back. I'm glad. I was worried." "Don't," she said. It was one word, and it landed like a wall going up. Richard's mouth closed. Behind him, in the doorway, Vivian appeared first, then Blair, then Camille, drawn by the sound of a car in the driveway, and Elena watched her sisters take in the sight of her, dressed simply, but differently now, standing with a composure that hadn't been available to her 4 days ago, with expressions caught somewhere between confusion and something that looked almost like envy. "I know about my mother," Elena said, and she watched the words hit her father exactly where she'd aimed them. "I know she worked for Salvatore Conti. I know she wasn't in a car accident. I know she left something behind. And I know you've spent 20 years terrified someone would come looking for it." Richard's face went the color of old paper again, the same as it had in the driveway days before. "I don't know what he's told you," he started. "But it's not that simple, Elena. There's context you don't." "Then give me the context," she said. "Here, now, in front of everyone, since apparently that's the only way anything true ever gets said in this house." "This isn't the place. You made the driveway the place," Elena said, and her voice didn't shake. Not once. 4 days of careful control finally finding somewhere honest to spend itself. "You lined me up like inventory in this exact spot and let a stranger see exactly what you thought I was worth. So don't tell me this isn't the place. This is the only place you've ever been honest. And it wasn't even on purpose." Vivian stepped forward, arms crossed, something unreadable moving across her face. "Is it true what she's saying?" Richard didn't answer, and the silence answered for him. "You told us she was your late wife's cousin's daughter," Blair said slowly, like she was working through arithmetic she didn't want the answer to. "You told us we took her in out of kindness." "It was more complicated than that," Richard said. "It was a debt," Luca said, quiet, final, stepping forward just enough to make his presence in the conversation undeniable. "Your father owed a dangerous man a favor, and the favor was raising a child quietly and never asking what she might be carrying. He didn't take Elena in out of kindness. He took her in because refusing wasn't an option, and every year he let you 3 believe he was generous. He was really just managing a liability he was too afraid to look at directly." "That's not—" Richard's voice cracked entirely now, the performance finally fully collapsing. "You don't understand the position I was in. Conti's men made it very clear what would happen if I refused. I did what I had to do to protect this family." "You didn't protect me," Elena said. "You hid me. There's a difference, and I've spent 20 years not knowing which one I was getting." Camille, silent until now, looked between her father and Elena, with something breaking open in her face. "You knew," she said quietly. "All these years, at every birthday you skipped for her, every time you sat her at the far end of the table, you knew who she really was, and you decided the rest of us didn't need to." "I was protecting all of you," Richard said. "But it came out thin. Unconvincing. A man arguing a case he no longer believed himself. You were protecting yourself, Elena said. You've just never had the nerve to say it plainly. The driveway had gone entirely silent, the way it had 4 days before. Except this time, Elena wasn't the one standing at the edge of it, waiting to be looked at. She stood in the center, Luca a step behind her, rather than beside her. Close enough to be present, far enough to let the moment belong entirely to her. I'm not asking for an apology, she said finally. I don't think you have one in you that isn't about yourself. I just wanted you to say it once, out loud, in front of the daughters you actually chose to love, so none of us can pretend anymore. Richard said nothing. That's what I thought, Elena said, and turned toward the car. Vivian caught her arm before she reached it, gently. None of the old performance in it. Elena, I didn't know. I want you to know I didn't know. Elena looked at her, really looked, and found something almost sincere in her sister's face for the first time in years. I believe you, she said. That doesn't fix 20 years. But I believe you. She got into the car without looking back at the house, and Luca slid in beside her this time, not across from her, not putting distance between them, and reached over, briefly, to close his hand around hers. You didn't need me for any of that, he said quietly, as the car pulled away. No, Elena agreed. But I'm glad you were there anyway. The call came 2 nights later, while Elena sat curled in the study with the notebook open on her lap, trying to decipher her mother's handwriting, one careful word at a time. She knew something was wrong, before Luca said a single word. She'd learned the shape of his stillness by now, the particular quality of quiet that meant he was calculating instead of resting. And the moment he stepped into the study with his phone still in his hand, that stillness had turned into something sharper. Delgado knows, he said. About the notebook. About you. Elena's hands went cold around the leather cover. How? Doesn't matter how. What matters is he's not a man who waits. Luca crossed the room, crouched in front of her chair, so they were eye level, a posture she hadn't seen him take before. Not commanding, not calculating, just present. I need you to listen to me carefully. He'll come for the notebook, and he'll assume the easiest way to get it is through you. So I'm bait. You're a target, he corrected, quiet and exact. Which is different, and which is why you're not leaving this house, and why there will be 6 men on this property by midnight instead of 2. Elena looked down at the notebook, at her mother's careful, slanted handwriting. 20 years of silence compressed into a few dozen pages, and felt something harden in her chest that hadn't been there before. I'm tired of being something men fight over, she said. My father used me as inventory. Now Delgado wants me as a target. I want to be the one who ends it, not the reason it keeps going. That's not your fight. You made it my fight, she said, the moment you pointed at me in that driveway. Something moved behind his eyes. Recognition, maybe, or the particular ache of watching someone become exactly as unmanageable as you'd hoped they would be. What do you want to do? He said. It wasn't really a question. It was a door he was holding open. I want to use it, Elena said, not hide it. If this notebook is the only thing that's ever made me matter to men like Delgado, then I want it to matter on my terms. Give it to whoever needs to see it. Police, press, whoever burns him fastest, and take the target off both our backs at once. That's dangerous. Hiding never worked, she said. 20 years of hiding got me a driveway and a father who called me an afterthought. I'd rather be dangerous and choosing than safe and invisible. Luca studied her for a long moment, something unguarded moving across his face. You sound like your mother. Good, Elena said. Maybe she should have won. He didn't argue with her. That, she was learning, was the thing about him. He pushed hard against danger but never against her, and the difference mattered more than she'd expected it to. By midnight, the house had changed shape around her. Men at every entrance, low voices in the hall, Luca on the phone in 3 languages she didn't understand, arranging something she only partially followed. Copies of the notebook's key pages were already moving, quietly, toward a federal contact Luca trusted, toward a journalist who'd spent years circling Delgado's territory, without proof. toward exactly the kind of daylight men like that couldn't survive. Delgado came anyway. Men like him always did, Luca said. Pride outlasting sense, especially when sense would have told him to run. Elena watched from an upstairs window as 3 cars she didn't recognize rolled up the same kind of gravel drive she'd once stood at the edge of, and told herself, with the dry, stubborn humor that had never once left her even when everything else had, that at least this driveway had better lighting. It was over faster than she expected. Luca's men were efficient, unshowy, entirely unlike the dramatic reckonings she'd half-braced for. Delgado was taken, not killed. Luca had been firm about that, quiet and immovable, because a dead man couldn't be tied to a paper trail already moving through federal hands, and a live one, cornered and desperate, made mistakes that finished the job better than violence ever could. By morning, it was done. Not entirely. These things never were, Luca told her. Not all at once, but enough. Enough that Delgado's operation was unraveling under its own weight. Enough that the men who'd have come looking for Elena next had far bigger problems now than a notebook and the woman who'd carried it out of hiding. She found Luca on the back terrace as the sun came up, still in yesterday's clothes, a coffee going cold in his hand. "You didn't sleep," she said. "Neither did you. I was watching you not sleep." It felt only fair. He almost smiled, the closest she'd seen yet, a small, tired curve at the corner of his mouth that undid something in her chest she hadn't fully braced for. "It's done," he said, "or close enough to done that you can stop waiting for the next car in the driveway." "And after this?" she asked. "What happens to the woman you pointed at because you needed a notebook?" Luca set the coffee down and crossed the space between them, slow, deliberate, giving her every chance to step back if she wanted to. She didn't. "I told you in the car," he said. "I didn't plan you. I planned the ledger. I planned pulling you out of that house." His voice dropped, rough at the edges in a way she hadn't heard from him before. "I didn't plan needing you to still be standing here when it was over. But you are, and I find I'd like you to keep standing here, if you're willing." "That's not really a question," Elena said, echoing the driveway. 4 days and a lifetime ago." "No," Luca admitted. "But it is now." 6 weeks later, the gala was Luca's idea, though he'd never admit it out loud. A public event, half business and half theater, exactly the kind of gathering where the right people needed to see him standing beside the right woman. "You don't have to do this," he said, adjusting his cufflink in the mirror while Elena stood behind him in a dress Rosa had insisted on. Deep green, nothing like the pastel uniform her sisters had worn in that driveway 6 weeks ago. "I know," Elena said. "I want to." She meant it. Somewhere in the last 6 weeks, between the federal statements and the quiet unraveling of Delgado's territory, and the slow, careful architecture of trust being built between her and a man who still, occasionally, forgot how to say things plainly, she'd stopped feeling like a woman waiting to be told where to stand. The ballroom, when they arrived, was full of exactly the kind of people who'd have overlooked her 4 months ago without a second glance. Polished, powerful, dressed like their clothes cost more than her father's entire debt. Elena felt the old instinct rise, the urge to find the edge of the room and disappear into it. Luca's hand found the small of her back instead. Steady, unhurried, an anchor rather than a display. "You don't have to shrink," he said quietly. "Not here. Not anywhere. With me." "Old habit," she admitted. "Break it," he said. "I chose you standing in gravel. I'm not interested in a version of you that apologizes for the room." Across the ballroom, conversation shifted subtly as people registered who stood beside him. Not the polished, expected choice a man like Luca DeSantis might have made, but a woman most of them had never heard of, entirely unbothered by their attention, dry humor still intact even as a dozen powerful strangers turned to look. She spotted Vivian near the entrance an hour later, hovering at the edge of the crowd the way Elena once had, and felt something soften in her chest at the sight of her sister looking uncertain in a room full of strangers. "Go say hello," Luca said, following her gaze. "I'll survive 5 minutes without you." Generous of you. I told you, he said. I can be, when it matters. Vivian's smile, when Elena approached, was smaller than the practiced version from the driveway. Real, maybe. Or at least trying to be. I wasn't sure you'd want to see me. I didn't invite you, Elena said. But I'm glad Luca did. He said you'd say that. Vivian glanced past her, toward where Luca stood, in quiet conversation with two men whose names commanded a different kind of silence in the room. He asks about you, you know, before any of this. Whenever he came around about Dad's business, I always thought it was strange. Strange how? He'd ask if I'd seen you, Vivian said. Nobody else ever asked that. Elena filed that away, something warm and unresolved settling in her chest, and let herself for once simply feel it instead of examining it for danger. Later, near the end of the night, Luca found her by the terrace doors. The noise of the ballroom softened behind glass, the city glittering below like something that had finally decided to make room for her. Your father sent a message today, he said, through a lawyer, wants to discuss reconciliation. And I told the lawyer you'd respond when you were ready, and not a moment before. Elena looked out at the skyline, turning the offer over in her mind without urgency, the way a person turns over something that no longer has the power to hurt them by surprise. Maybe someday, she said. Not today. Today I'd rather not think about a man who needed a stranger to teach him what I was worth. Fair, Luca said. She turned to look at him. Really look. The way she had in the driveway on the first day. Except now the weighing wasn't one-sided, and what she found in his face wasn't calculation at all. You still haven't really told me why, she said. Not the notebook, not the strategy. Why me, standing at the edge of that grass, out of every woman in that driveway? Luca reached up, tucked a strand of hair behind her ear, with a gentleness that felt entirely at odds with everything she'd first believed about him. Because everyone else in that driveway was performing a version of themselves they thought I wanted, he said. You were the only one just standing there, being exactly who you were, unwilling to shrink even when the whole world told you to. I've spent my life surrounded by people who tell me what I want to hear. I wasn't interested in one more. That's almost romantic, Elena said, for a man who once threatened my father without raising his voice. I contain multitudes, Luca said. And this time, he actually smiled. Full, unguarded, the kind she was starting to realize she'd earned the right to see. Choose any daughter, he said. And you didn't hesitate, Elena finished quietly. No, Luca said, drawing her closer. The city lights spread out gold and endless below them. I never do, when I already know the answer. If you loved watching her go from invisible to unforgettable, hit subscribe to Mr. Mafia Boss. Because this is just one story in a world full of dangerous men, dark obsession, and women who were underestimated for the very last time. New sizzling Mafia romance drops every week, packed with slow-burn tension, shocking twists, and endings that'll leave you breathless. And before you go, drop a comment and let me know where in the world you're listening from tonight. I read every single one.